numerous awards for Best Employment Law, a fierce advocate fighting for your legal needs.
Welcome to Legal Views with your host, Attorney Sheila R. Stewart.
Good afternoon, and welcome. You are tuned in to Legal Views with Attorney Sheila R. Stewart. We are here in St. Louis, Missouri at the law office of Sheila R. Stewart, located at 231 South Beamiston Avenue, Suite 800, Clayton, Missouri, 63105. That phone number there is 314-854-1339. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It is growing and we are getting many views, and we would like for you to subscribe and follow the shows. We are excited on today. We are excited. We have with us Nigel Quiroz, all the way from New York, with the Innocence Project. He is going to share some awesome information with you to assist you. I get a lot of emails, letters, text messages regarding individuals who have been wrongfully convicted, who are now incarcerated, even individuals that are on death row. And many people want to know, what can we do to help our loved ones and our family and friends? They didn't do this crime. Well, I brought to you today an expert with the Innocence Project that can give you some awesome information to assist you in identifying strategies to help those who are likely wrongfully convicted. Welcome, Nigel. I want to read you just a little bit about his background. He has an awesome background here, and we are so excited. And we want to share with you just some of the great things that he has done and the work that he has done with the Innocence Project. And let me pull up his bio and read some of this information to you about this great young man who has dedicated his young life to help those that are in need. Isn't that wonderful? When you can have an individual that's dedicated to doing this type of work. Nigel works as a field organizer with the Innocence Project. He also has previously researched legal issues that pertain to the organization's policy issues, which seeks to prevent and reveal wrongful convictions and assure the compensation for wrongfully convicted people upon their release from prison. And I think that is really key, because lots of times individuals are wrongfully convicted and they spend all these years in prison, and when they get out, they don't receive anything. Previously, Nigel served as a Texas legislative intern scholar, where he worked as an intern with the Innocence Project and the policy department. He has also worked with the Mirror Group, where he served as a junior lobbyist with the Louisiana State Legislature. In addition, Nigel worked with the Louisiana Housing Trust Fund Initiative, where he served as a committee organizer. He's a law graduate from Southern University Center in 2017, and he has just been doing a tremendous job since finishing school. Welcome, Nigel. Welcome to our show. And can you just tell us about the work that you are currently doing with the Innocence Project?
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you for having me. Yeah, definitely. I can talk about the work that we do at the Innocence Project. Like you said, our mission at the Innocence Project is to free wrongfully convicted people through DNA testing and reform the system to reveal and prevent future wrongful convictions. So many people know the work that we do in the courtroom, getting people exonerated, but we also do work with policy to change laws to actually hopefully help ensure that nobody will be wrongfully convicted again through policy changes in our legislative system. So just a little background about the Innocence Project. The first DNA exoneration in the country was in 1989. And our founders, Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld, saw that DNA was being used to actually put people in prison. So they thought to themselves, why couldn't they use DNA to actually prove people's innocence? So the Innocence Project was started as a legal clinic at the Benjamin Cardozo School of Law in New York City in 1992. And we still have a great relationship with Cardozo. Our legal clinic students still come from Cardozo, and we started in 2004 as our own 501c3 nonprofit. So that's how we started off as an organization, and how we continue to work to this day.
Great. Let's get started in speaking in terms of those that are wrongfully convicted. What are some of the causes that result in innocent individuals that ending up in prison for 20 and 30 years, have not committed the crime? They put on a defense that states that they did not commit the crime. And for some reason, they end up in prison doing 30 to 40 years for a crime they did not commit. Can you just give us an overview on some of the issues and factors that result in these individuals having this horrible experience?
Yes, definitely, Sheila. So there are many different causes that go into wrongful convictions. And in certain cases, there might be more than one cause that contribute to a wrongful conviction. The number one cause of a wrongful conviction that we see in about 69% of our cases is eyewitness misidentification. So when I started at the Innocence Project, I thought that, an eyewitness is like open and shut, like slam dunk. There's nothing that can really trump that. But eyewitness identification gets kind of faulty, especially when it's across racial lines. So when the perpetrator of the crime is a different race than the victim of the crime, there's just something about the way our brains are wired that we can't really process faces of different races with accuracy, with that much accuracy. So that's the leading cause of wrongful convictions. We also have false confessions or admissions that occur in about 33% of wrongful convictions. A very big case of this was actually the exonerated five, the five teenagers that were actually wrongfully convicted of a sexual assault that they didn't commit. They were all underage. They were all actually interrogated for hours on end without the benefit of an attorney or even parents present. And They were told, so they were told, if you tell us that this person did it, you get to go home. And this was basically a tactic that was used to actually get their wrongful convictions. And it's pretty egregious because that type of policy isn't actually illegal. Like, the police can actually lie to you about the evidence that they have against you in order to ensure a conviction. So it just shows you how that goes. Another issue that kind of goes into that is misapplication of forensic sciences. There's certain forensic sciences that haven't been validated, and prosecutors may hang their hats on those. A big one is bite mark evidence. In the 80s and 90s, there were many people who were wrongfully convicted with the scientific method that, a bite mark is actually as a unique identifier as a fingerprint. So they were using bite marks on bodies of people and trying to match them with suspects, and that was being used to actually wrongfully convict a lot of people. So the misapplication of forensic sciences occurs in about 43% of all wrongful convictions.
What about DNA evidence? People say DNA do not lie. There's been a lot of errors made with DNA evidence that have caused people to spend time in prison. And then as the technology improved, they are exonerated by the better types of DNA. Do you have information on that you could share?
Yes. So at the very beginning of DNA, you needed a lot more to actually get a decent sample than what we need now. Now we have different types of DNA testing that you can have like way little amount of DNA actually to test it to exonerate a person. So as you said, as the technology gets better, it can be used to actually exonerate people. And also, you might have somebody who let's say a crime happened in your home, your DNA is going to be all over the home. So they might test something and your DNA is on it, but you live there, and there might be an unverified sample who they don't have a match to. So that might go on into actually securing a wrongful conviction.
And let's talk briefly about the big case out of Texas. The Innocence Project had a big hand in this case with the individual Melissa Luciano.
Melissa Lucio, yes.
Melissa Lucio. And this was an individual, this was a woman that was accused of killing her 2-year-old daughter. She allegedly fell down the stairs and died. And the police, interrogated this poor woman for hours after the child had died. And she was found guilty. Eventually, she was found guilty. And she was placed on death row for the murder of her child. There was no evidence that she had ever committed any type of abuse towards her other children. I think she had 12 other children. She had a lot of children and kids, and there was no evidence of this woman ever harming any of her children. However, she was found guilty of murder of this baby, 2-year-old daughter, and sentenced to death. So just bring us up to speed on the work that was done to stay this execution.
Yes, so it was totally a group effort between Melissa's lawyers down in Texas and different organizations down in Texas and the Innocence Project. This was just something. Melissa Lucio wasn't originally one of our clients, but the case was actually brought to us and brought to our radar. So with the help of our magnificent communications team and our social media team, we were able to get the word out on what was going on. The policy team actually, did a lot of lobbying with our partners down in Texas in order to get bipartisan support for the staying of Melissa Lucio's execution. So it was an all hands on deck effort. Our exonerees down in Texas signed on to a letter saying that that they need to look further into this and that this execution should be stayed. So it was a magnificent effort, and her execution was eventually stayed, and she is going to be granted a new trial, thankfully. So hopefully she can be exonerated very soon. So this was just an actual example of organizing, policy work, and legal work all in action, because everybody went into go mode at the same time in order to actually stop this innocent woman from being put to death.
Excellent. And they did a great job. It was a group effort, and it was an outstanding job that everyone did in helping this woman. I just thought it was terrible that she had to go through this after losing her child. For those that are interested in contacting the Innocence Project, and they may have a loved one that they believe that are wrongfully convicted, tell us the process that you guys use in identifying cases that you will take, because you can't take all of the cases.
Yes.
And that's a very difficult process. And so I know you must go through a very thorough assessment to identify those that you're going to fight for. So everyone that may believe they have a good case, that it may not appear to be a strong case once you guys do your assessment and analysis. So for those that are looking to reach out, tell us the process or the assessment process that you use to determine which cases you will take.
Okay, yes. So the first step is an individual who's incarcerated will write to the Innocence Project. So somebody can't write on behalf of a person. They can, the person that's incarcerated can write in. And we generally get about 2,400 letters a year. So about 200 a month. Yeah. So that just shows like how many, just the need and how many people are writing in order to receive some sort of relief here. And we accept only about 2% of those cases. So our intake process is very, very strenuous, and just because of the sheer number and volume of cases we get, it probably would it takes about 10 years in order from when a person first writes in until when they're actually taken in as a client of the Innocence Project. Now, of course, if it's 10 years, just because of how long the process is and how many letters that we get, it takes about 10 years. Now, of course, if a person is on death row, or there's any other mitigating circumstances like that, that process can be sped up, but on average, it takes about 10 years. So our intake department looks at the letter, reads the letter, and sees if there's any DNA testing, DNA evidence. So all of our cases are DNA evidence. So all our work is DNA based. Now there are other organizations that we work with that can take cases that aren't DNA based. So we might actually refer a person to another organization that might be able to help them if there's no DNA evidence. But all our cases are DNA cases. So
for those that may not understand what that means, can you just elaborate a little more on what a DNA based case is?
Yes. So a DNA based case. So any case where DNA is left over. So most of our cases involve murders or sexual assaults or things of that nature, where there may be DNA evidence left behind. So if there's no DNA there, if it's like a robbery or something like that, and there's no DNA left behind, and there's no DNA that can prove or disprove a person's innocence, then we can't take those. But we do. There are other organizations in our network that can actually help with that. So
okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So yes, sir. Proceed. Yes, sir.
Oh yeah. So after our intake case analysts taken in the case, it's actually forwarded to an investigations attorney. The investigations attorney might go back and look into some of the evidence that might be overlooked, interview any witnesses that might not have been called, or any other people, to try to kind of piece together the investigation. So once it gets past that process, it gets forwarded to our legal department. Our post-conviction litigation department actually looks into a case, and they vote on it to see if it's a good case to take. And once that happens, then it's a person is taken on as a client. Another reason why exonerations take so long is because the wheels of justice. I was told in law school, the wheel of justice turns slow. So sometimes it'll take so long to get a new trial. You have to find new evidence, and some states might have a very strenuous burden to kind of bring a new evidence for a new trial. So that kind of goes into why it takes so long sometimes.
So do the people that, like, once you tell this individual, we are taking your case, and the process is going on for 7 years, are the individuals, do they stay hopeful? What type of mindset do these individuals have when they're going through this process?
Yes. So I've spoken to many of our exonerees, and they say, like, that was kind of the only reason to kind of keep them going and keep them motivated during their prison sentences, because they know that there's somebody fighting for them, and that they know that they'll eventually go home, no matter how long it takes. It offers a sense of hope. It offers something to kind of look forward to, and just something to fight for. So our attorneys and our paralegals actually keep in constant contact with them and are always updating them on their cases. So it's definitely a very hands-on and a very communal process. I would say.
Very good. There are, as you know, and most people would know this, is that there's a huge disparity that exists between people of color with wrongful conviction cases versus other races and ethnic groups. How can we work to change this problem?
Yes. So a way that we can work to change this problem, and I just want to give you a couple of stats. Our exonerees by race, it's 62% African American, 7% Latino, 30% white, 30% white and 1% other. So it's kind of like a microcosm of the criminal justice system. Black and brown people are over policed and over incarcerated. So that kind of directly shows in the stats of the exonerated individuals. A big issue with that is that you know, I always say that, well, the stats actually show that over 90% of cases never go to trial. So that means that people are pleading out. They're pleading guilty in order to go home or receive a lesser sentence or something like that. There's a guilty plea problem in this country that kind of puts a person in the criminal justice system. So even if you're innocent the first time, even if you just plead into probation, and you might be picked up for a petty crime or something else, you'll be actually put into prison for something that you didn't do, and you'll be sentenced to longer sentence because of that guilty plea problem. So I feel like just the over policing and the over criminalization of Black communities actually leads into the numbers that we see. A lot of ways that we can affect that is bail reform, actually discovery reform, which allows criminal defense attorneys to actually know what evidence the prosecutors have, and there's an open sharing of those discovery files so that a fair trial can be put on. Also, a speedy trial reform. So a lot of times people might not be able to afford bail, and they also aren't afforded a speedy trial. So that's supposed to be a constitutional guarantee, and people are sitting in prisons for months, sometimes even years. We had a case, a very famous case, Khalif Browder, who was a young man who was incarcerated for stealing a book bag and wasn't able to see trial for 3 years. And he was sitting on Rikers Island, which is one of the most deplorable prisons in this country, for 3 years. So all of these factors go into actually the numbers that we see as it affects Black and brown communities. So all of these things need to be changed in order to effectuate that change.
I know in the beginning you referenced the individuals in New York, that was accused of the rape, the teenage Black boys, the famous 5 Black boys that admitted to the rape. They were giving some grueling interrogation techniques, and they did not have counsel present, and they were there for hours and hours and hours, and they eventually said they did it. They spent time in prison for that. And then evidence later on exonerated these individuals because they did not do it. I think that is a huge problem that I believe that can be corrected easily, that the police cannot take these statements and use these statements as evidence when counsel is not present. Normally, a person will not admit that I did this heinous crime and write it out. That is a red flag that something has gone wrong during that interrogation process. And when that individual is not represented, they admit to a heinous crime, and then that heinous crime, that evidence is presented in that trial. That's some of the beginning stages as wrongful conviction cases. And I think that is a area that needs to be looked upon for individuals that did not have appropriate counsel. What are your thoughts on that?
Those are very, very good thoughts. Actually, in New York, we're trying to pass a bill that guarantees teenagers the right to counsel. It's kind of I'm trying to think of the word. It's kind of outrageous that this is not something that's guaranteed. We've had cases where a person asked for. I was reading. There was a case where an individual said, "Just get me my lawyer, dog," and the appeals court interpreted that as the officer not not thinking that he was asking for his lawyer, but asking for a lawyer dog, which I don't understand how you can see something like that, hear something like that, and not get that person an attorney. So there needs to be laws on the books that guarantee, especially those that are underage who are actually susceptible to, like teenagers are susceptible to these types of persuasions all the time, especially from authority figures. So, they might hear, okay, you're going to go home, they talk to them and let them know, like, you're not in that much trouble, and they're being lied to, and they can't really fully process the gravity of what they're saying and admitting to heinous crimes, as you said, and seeing that false confession actually is what seals their fate and gets them wrongfully convicted. So I feel like laws need to be put in place and enforced. So another thing that goes into that, we've actually passed reforms in 29 states that mandate the recording of interrogations from start to finish. So with the exonerated 5, only their admissions were recorded. So you didn't see anything that went into securing that admission. You didn't see anything that was told to them by the detectives in order to secure that admission. So now we have in 29 states that there should be an audio or audio and visual recording from the start to the finish, from when that person sits down in the interrogation room until the end, to see what went on, in order to protect people who are in custody, and also to protect the police officers who might be interrogating.
And that's an excellent law, because I think that is how many Black and brown people, lives are just snatched away in the beginning of the process. By the time they get to trial, it just, to me, it's officially, you're going to be sentenced, because the evidence is already against you by the time you get to trial. That confession is, it's going to carry a lot of weight going into the trial. You also mentioned the problem of eyewitnesses, and that an eyewitness is an individual that often gets it wrong. Evidence, statistics, and data consistently show that eyewitnesses, that is a bad form of evidence to use to convict a person. What do you think we can do to change that law, to change, not the law, but to change that level of evidence being so strongly relied upon when we know that it's faulty?
So yeah, that's a great question. So we have a reform in 26 states that kind of reforms eyewitness identification methods. So what we advocate is for what we call a blinded administration of a lineup. So actually, the police officer who's conducting the lineup, we would prefer that they do not know who the main suspect is, because an actual lineup is supposed to be 4 random individuals who kind of look the same and kind of fit the description of the suspect, in order to get the best and most reliable identification. So we push for a double blinded. So it would be a police officer or a detective who doesn't know who the suspect is, so that they can't, either implicitly or explicitly kind of lead an eyewitness to point out a person. And they should also be able to tell a person, the main suspect might not be here, because we've seen many times that a case, you might have a suspect at the beginning, and that person ends up the person not doing the crime, and years later they catch the suspect. But a lot of times when eyewitnesses are called for a lineup, they feel the pressure at the time to pick out somebody, because they feel like that person has to be there, and many times they aren't. And we also push for what we call a confidence statement. So if you do pick out a person and you're like, okay, I think this is the individual that I saw, they just ask them, how confident are you of that? On a scale of 1 to 10, you like, it was a little dark, so I'm not totally sure, so I might be a 3, or I had a good look and it might be an 8 or a 9, and all of that kind of goes into how we weigh that evidence when the trial comes. So that's actually a big reform that we push for, and also the recording of that lineup, because a lot of the lineups now, you have the typical in-person lineups when there are actually suspects there. But many times it's just a book of pictures, and you're flipping through a book of pictures, and you're like, okay, do you see this individual here? Do you see this individual there? So you just want to see everything that goes into it in order that you can weigh that evidence the best way when trial comes.
Do you have preventative programs or partnerships that you do with schools, high schools, to make young people aware of some of the problems that take place in black and brown communities, and how they can probably educate themselves to stay out of trouble, and what they can do when they're identified for a crime that they likely didn't commit? Do you have anything like that that you guys put on?
Well, definitely as a field organizer, I do a lot of work with the faith-based community and student-led organizations.
Okay.
So that's something that I speak a lot about. We've actually, started to where we were thinking about doing a kind of like know your rights seminars at schools, and just let kids know that always ask for an attorney, and if there are any younger individuals or any adults listening right now, always ask for an attorney. Just always ask for an attorney whenever, even if you think it's like the most minute thing. I've seen, issues. One of the exonerated five, actually, Corey Wise, he wasn't even a suspect. He went in to kind of help his friend, and he ended up being wrongfully convicted and serving the longest term out of everybody. So, just always ask for an attorney. If there's anything that you can take away from this conversation, that's your right. It's your constitutional right. They can't deny that. So so we always kind of advocate for that, and we always have talks at schools, and we have our exonerees speak to students, and just let them know what their backstory was, and how they were just kids like they were when they were wrongfully convicted. And it can really happen to you. Like, just don't think that you're so far removed that something like this couldn't happen to you, because I've seen active military members wrongfully convicted. I've seen the people who are wrongfully convicted come from all walks of life and all backgrounds. So it's just best to know.
Can you share the details, if you can, of a particular case that you have worked on where an individual, unlikely individual, was wrongfully convicted, and what that person went through, and the work that you all did to assist that person and getting exonerated?
Well, I know this is not a case that I worked on, because I've only been there for 5 years, so a lot of our exonerees have been out for a while. But we do have an exoneree, Jared Adams, who he was actually in college. He went to college and was doing what he was supposed to do, and was wrongfully convicted of a crime that he didn't commit. And he was placed in prison for years and years upon end. He didn't think that he would be there, and he was convicted for 7 years for a crime that he didn't commit. Now, Jared, actually, when he was exonerated, he actually went and finished school, and now Jared is now a practicing attorney with a very successful practice, and he is very active and influential in the wrongful conviction community. But this is an individual who was doing what he was supposed to do. Finished high school, was in college, and was wrongfully convicted while he was in college, and lost 7 years of his life for a crime that he didn't commit.
And do you recall what was the level of evidence, or what was the strong, compelling evidence that was used to convict him? Was it an eyewitness? Was it DNA?
It was actually it was like perjury and false. It was perjury and false accusation and inadequate legal defense. So he had an attorney who didn't put up an adequate defense at the time, and there was there was no DNA evidence against him, of course, but he was a young black teen on schooling in campus. This happened on campus, and he was wrongfully convicted of a crime that he didn't commit.
That's horrible. And he practices law now?
Yes, he practices law now.
That's a very interesting story. I would I would like to meet with him. That is awesome.
Yes.
And what was the crime he was accused of?
Sexual assault.
I figured that's what it was. That sexual assault is one of the when it comes to Black men, that is a crime that they are often accused of. And many of them, Black men of color, will receive that wrongful conviction. Didn't touch the woman. And what advice or what information can you share around providing a defense in those types of crimes?
I think the best thing that I can say is kind of, like I said earlier, just always ask for an attorney. Do not speak to a police officer without an attorney present, because they will try to lie and kind of turn the evidence against you and try to get you to admit to a crime that you didn't commit.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the best thing.
For those that are watching, can you share with them how to contact you? With that individual, we went over this a little earlier, but just a little more detail. How to contact you, that impact statement, and that package they need to put together to get their case in front of an assessment crew. Can you share that again for those individuals?
Yes. So you can definitely download an intake form and write in at the innocenceproject.org. Our address is 40 Worth Street, Suite 701. It's all on the website. So I don't know if you have a pen and paper, but our address is 40 Worth Street, Suite 701, New York 10013. And we have a form that you can fill out and mail to us.
And in that form, when that and it must come from the prisoner, can't come from the prisoner's family.
Yes.
Why is it important that it comes from the prisoner versus their mother or their sister? Why is that significant?
So we just want to have it directly from the person, and most times when the person is incarcerated, they have all their paperwork with them. So when we write in the intake form, we write you back and we ask for copies of whatever evidence that you have against you. So it's kind of the best case and the easiest way that we can get all that stuff at one time.
Okay, very good, very good. Now, there was a famous movie that was out called Just Mercy. And it dealt with an African-American man in Alabama that was falsely accused of, this is a true story, that was falsely accused of murdering a Caucasian young lady. And she was brutally killed. And the Black guy was accused of committing this crime. And he spent many, many years on death row. And the unheard of thing was he was exonerated and he was removed from Alabama death row, which is very difficult to do. And got a new trial, and he was allowed to go home. And he testified before Congress and places to talk about his experiences and that wrongful conviction. Why is it so difficult to get a stay and to get people off death row with the wrongful convictions? That seems like that would be the easiest way because their lives are at stake, but it's almost the opposite.
Yes. So many times, and especially speaking of Alabama has one of the hardest laws in order to get back into court based on newly discovered DNA evidence. It's very hard to get back into court that way. So that was a pretty big hurdle there. When it comes to staying executions and doing that, sometimes people just don't want to admit that they're wrong, or don't want to admit that they might have made a past mistake. We saw it in the Melissa Lucio case. The DA down there, Sines, he, even with everything, with all the mountain pressure and everything that was going on, he just wasn't really as receptive to opening up or actually helping to stay the execution. Didn't want to, kind of say that he might have been wrong, or he wanted to take a second look at the evidence. Eventually that happened, but it took a lot of public pressure. So, like I said, a lot of times the wheels of justice do turn slow, and a lot of times we had to go into a legislative session and actually change a law in order to get that law amended, in order to be able to admit newly discovered DNA evidence in order to get a person exonerated. And the death penalty is just so it's so rough, because we've known of cases where people who've been posthumously exonerated. Mm-hmm. So I would think that if there's even a sliver that one person who would be who's innocent would be put to death, I feel like if that's even the slimmest possibility, that should just be taken off the table just immediately. But sometimes people just don't want to admit that they're wrong, and they feel like a person has to be put to death, and it's always a rough fight. So it takes a lot of what you saw with Melissa Lucio, what you saw with Purvis Payne in Tennessee. It just takes a lot of pressure from outside sources, individuals, like people who are watching the show, like just calling into their representatives, calling into the DA's office, and letting them know, like, you need to take a second look at this. You need to not put this person to death, because this person might well be innocent, and we don't want that person to be killed in our name.
And that's what one of the things I see is just the sheer arrogance from the government, the prosecutorial team. It's just like, we didn't do anything wrong. This person was convicted by a jury of their peers, mm-hmm. and the evidence is what convicted them. And it's like there's no humanity in this thing. This is a person's life, and it's like the understanding of what is taking place is just cold, mm-hmm. and it's a chilled effect on how people are being treated. And unfortunately, as I stated previously, it impacts people of color even more with these wrongful convictions and the closed ears towards the evidence that can assist these individuals. Now, you all provide seminars, speaking opportunities for individuals that work with your program that were wrongfully convicted. Now they are freed individuals, and they speak on the circuit where they provide information and they get money and so forth. Tell us about how that process works.
Okay, so we do have a speakers bureau. So a lot of our clients and exonerees, actually, when they're exonerated, they go around and are able to tell their stories to churches, schools, and different things. So we have a speakers bureau with a lot of our exonerees who are comfortable with sharing their story and speaking about that. So they're afforded the opportunity to become speakers, and a lot of their stories, like I always say, our greatest advocates are our clients. Mm-hmm. They can tell you, like I can tell you what they went through, but when the person is in front of your face and telling you exactly what they went through and how hard that process was day in and day out, and how hopeless they felt at times, and how overjoyed they were at the times, like that's what really can change hearts and change minds. Is that lived experience, that shared lived experience that a person who was wrongfully convicted was told.
Outstanding. Mm-hmm. We are coming to the close of our program. You have done a marvelous job. I want to thank you for being with us on today and for you taking the time to share. I would like for you to have the last and the final few words about the Innocence Project, anything that we didn't cover that you would like to cover with individuals that are tuning in. We're going to upload this and many will see this video. So is there anything that we did not share that you would like to share? That we did not cover, excuse me, anything that we did not cover?
I think we covered pretty much everything. Thank you, Sheila. Thank you for having us. Well, thank you for having me and having me speak on behalf of the Innocence Project. We're continuing to do this work. We're going on 30 years. We work on all donations from private individuals. So you can sign up at innocenceproject.org and you can pledge to give $5, $10, $15, $20 a month if you want to, or a one-time donation. that will really help us out, and that will really help help the work we do, and help us bring more people home. So thank you for having me again, and thank you for this wonderful program that you have in this platform.
Well, thank you, and don't leave. And you have heard it here on Legal Views with attorney Sheila R. Stewart. We thank you for tuning in, and we will be back on next week, and we will discuss the tragic situation that took place in Buffalo, New York. Thank you, and have a wonderful weekend. And thank you for being with us on today.